Another demo for you today. In this demo, we are going to be using Matt's value study. We are going to take the value study. I'm going to show you guys at least taking the value study and taking it to the finished illustration. So yeah, let's get started. Oh yeah, by the way, this also kind of serves a little bit of a critique for Matt's illustration as well. So yeah, first off, Matt, it looks really good. I like the symmetry. I think you could definitely lean into that just a little bit more if you're gonna go for symmetry by simply moving around some stuff. I also like the composition a bit, having the pillars kind of come up front. I think this is a really good way to show depth in the illustration, and then and also sort of breaking up the same symmetry by placing your main character down here. I think that's a really good thing that you did. Now, so let's figure out how to sort of mess around with the composition as is, because it looks like to me it really depends. Really, like if you start over from, let's say, your value studies and move on to your final illustration by doing a more clean up line art and then going through the process of adding in the values again and all that stuff. Great, you could correct it during your cleanup stage. But if you're going from value study directly from value study all the way to the finish, then we have to use a couple of things, right? So right now I'm working with a flat illustration, meaning that everything is compressed into one layer. Now again, if you're not going to be starting over from scratch, then this is a great way for to sort of kind of go about it. So the first thing we're going to do is to unlock this. Now, Matt, I assume you probably have it in all layers, so this is pretty much for people who have it all flattened already. And it's going from value studies to finish. So you want to unlock it, and then you want to copy it. Now, and then the next thing you want to do first, actually, is to go to image size. You want to check out the size of your illustration that you're working with. The first thing I'm going to do is to raise that resolution. Remember, 300 dpi is the best thing to do. And we're going to go for a much smaller canvas size. Let's say 15. And press OK. Everything looks much larger, and if you're going to do this, if you're going to go from a smaller DPI to a larger one, you want to do it at the start so that you don't have to do it later. Remember, if you guys watched my the Zoom hangout from last Saturday, if you go from a higher resolution to lower, great. But if you go from lower resolution to a higher one, you're going to lose a lot of really cool like hard edges. Everything's just going to look really blurry, and it's just going to look really bad. So it's better to go from up to down than it is to down to go up. So if you're going to do this, if you're going to go from down to up, do it at the start, because you're going to paint over it anyway. So it's better to kind of just do it from the very beginning. Alright, again, I copied a brand new layer. And now I'm going to turn off the original layer, so we have our copy here. And we're going to use some of the marquee tools and the lasso tool, namely the lasso tool, which is the third tool over at the toolbar. Click on that. Alright, so the selection tools, like the marquee tools, like the rectangular, elliptical, as well as the lasso tool, polygonal lasso tool, these are great for selecting and isolating things within your composition. So let's take the lasso tool. The lasso tool is a really good one because it allows you to free-handedly select things. Polygonal allows you to kind of take points and sort of make points and then close it out in the end to make your selection. But what I like to use is the lasso tool because you could do it pretty much freehand. So what I'm going to do is and here's another tip. If you're trying to find the center, you could use a grid line. you can simply go over here where your ruler is in your document. If you don't have it there, if you don't have your ruler there, it's Command R or Control R to bring it up and down. I mean, to open it and close it. So Command R, or you could go to View and Show Ruler. So it's Command R or Control R for the PC. So going back to our lasso tool here, now I'm going to select the center line. Oh, actually, the grid line. Yes, I forgot about that. So once you have your ruler up, you can just simply go to the ruler, click on it, press, and then find your center line to add a little bit of a grid. I mean, pros and cons for the grid though. And by the way, excuse me guys, I'm still trying to get over a little bit of that thing that I went through in the weekend. Anyway, so the good thing about the grid is that it allows you to do it. Now, it's going to be invisible if you print or save it, but it's there for you just as a guide. The bad thing about it though is that if you paint while the grids are still on, sometimes it kind of does a weird thing where it almost messes up your freehand line or your line. So when you start painting, you might want to take that out if you're doing like a complete like a more intricate painting on top. Alright, so we found our middle, so we could base everything off of this, right? So let's take our lasso tool. Again, I create a brand new document so that I don't have to mess with the original. Let's take a lasso tool and select this part because I want to move it in the center. Now, once you select it, by the way, to select something, you have to close it out, no matter what, either polygonal tool or lasso tool. For example, if I do this and I let go, it will automatically it'll connect. So what you want to do is to close it out. So close it towards the very end like that. So going back here, let me select this. And let's say, okay, I messed up, right? You don't have to start over. You can hold down on Shift if you want to add onto it. Let's say add and close it out to basically add onto the marquee selection. Or you could hold on Option or Alt, and you can see the little minus sign right next to the cursor. Then you could take it out. So you have to hold down on Option or Alt. Hold down on Shift if you want to add. Hold down on Option or Alt if you want to take out. Okay? So now we have to basically you could do two things. You could take your Move tool, which is this one right here, and you can, since there's a selection, your Move tool turns into a Move and Cut tool, meaning if I move this, I basically cut it out of place. So if I turn this off, you're basically cutting it out of place, right? Or you could do the better thing, and you can hit Command C or Control C, and then Command V or Control V to paste another thing in place. So if I turn this off, I copied and pasted it into another layer right here. Again, Marquee, Command C or Control C, and then Command V or Control V to paste it in place. Now I'll take my Move tool, since there's no more marquee once you do that. I pretty much a free-floating layer here with the thing that we just cut and paste. So now we can just move it around, center it if we'd like. You can use the arrow key if you want to center it just a little bit more. Or you could hit Command T or Control T for free transform, or you could go to Edit, Free Transform, so that you could mess around with it just a little bit more if you'd like. Now remember, this is a cutout piece of your original illustration, which means that Move it around, it's going to overlay on top of everything. So let's say we want to make it just a little bit smaller. Now, of course, the thing behind it is going to peek through as well. But that's okay, you can paint that out a little bit later on. So let's say I want to make them smaller so that there's a little bit more depth. And there you go. So now let's create a brand new layer underneath it. Underneath this, let's take our paintbrush. Let me choose a hard brush, set it to 100%. Now remember, if you want to pick a color, hold down on Option or Alt to select colors around. Holding it down will allow you to select color, or you can use the eyedropper tool right here, or basically E, shortcut key E. While you have your brush on, hold down Option or Alt. Again, brand new layer underneath, and I can just paint this out. Basically, I'm picking surrounding values so that I can basically erase this out completely. Instead of using an eraser, I'll just paint it out. So that's basically the layer I just did here to hide it. Alright, that looks pretty good, right? Alright, so I'll hold down on Shift. I could click on my layers, Command or Control E, merge everything together. So here's our before layer, before illustration, here's our after. Alright, so moving on into the illustration part, something that I mentioned in the prior video, or any of the other videos I posted, you want to leave stuff like the glow effects all the way to the last part. You don't want to put them there yet. The reason being, by the way, I just took that little grid and I put it back to the ruler if you want to get rid of it, right? The reason being is that, those things could come after. What you want to do first is to place your block-in values, meaning you want to place your local colors or your local values first, and then add those lighting effects later. Because let's say you added those lighting effects already, then you want to change something, then, well, you're going to have to erase out that lighting effect, and you're going to have to start over. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to waste your time. You want to sort of, like I mentioned, think ahead. Think in layers and think ahead in terms of, what goes first. Basically like a cake, right? You don't want to put icing first and then build the cake around the icing. You want to, bake the cake, put on those layers, and then the stuff like this, which is basically the lighting effects or even color. If you want to use the blend modes for color, you want to think of those as like the frosting and the sprinkles and all the little doodahs that surrounds the cake itself. You want to have a solid cake layers there first. So kind of an easy way to think about that. You don't want to do the icing before you actually bake the cake first. So you want the solid, the cake, meaning the structure, the composition, the rendering even, and the anatomy of your characters. So yeah, those are what you want to focus in first. And the frosting stuff and the sprinkle stuff are stuff like overlay textures, some even color and highlight, and those lighting effects and glows. Those you want to push towards the very end. Alright, so once I have here, I'm going to start a new checkpoint. I'm going to copy by holding it down, dragging it to the plus with the square button, copy and paste it, so I have another checkpoint. So if I merge everything together, I could basically start over if I want. Okay? So now, again, I'm still working with a flat layer right now. So I showed you guys a video where you guys could use the layers to fill in and block in. But let's say you're more of a painter, and maybe if you're a beginner, you want to start out that way first instead of utilizing the full potential of the layers. It's something that you could kind of, take up over time and learn. But if you're coming in as a traditional painter, maybe you want to sort of base your workflow that way first. Meaning that you could take one layer like this, instead of messing around with the different layer and the way that you stack it, you could simply just start a brand new layer on top of your sketch and just take your hard brush. And by the way, if you look at this, I have a bunch of brushes. I only use maybe 1, 2, 3 brushes at most. Like, that's my go-to. Like 90% of what I do, I pretty much use the round brush or this custom oval brush that I've made, right? All the other brushes are really, really good, but sometimes they aren't as exact, or they could kind of mess up your shape sometimes. They're if I use, let's say, this one right here and I'm trying to do a straight line, maybe it kind of just messes with it. So I like to start with a default brush first, something like a round brush like this. And then I have my opacity turned on to 100. And then make sure that you turn on your toggle. Without it, you're just going to have a solid brush. So you want to turn that on so that you have more of a texture to it. What I find sometimes is if you use something like a texture brush and then you switch to default, it's a glitch in Photoshop that it seems to happen for some reason. You might have to reset your tool. So let's say you go down to a circle brush. You click on your tool up here in the options bar. Click on this little flywheel and then reset tool. If you do that, it'll revert back to default and it should be okay again. So just in case you encounter that. Alright, so again, toggle off, you get opaque inking brush. Toggle on, you get more of the sketching rendering brush. Okay. Really good solid structure here by Matt. I really like the composition. But now let's sort of just clean it up and prepare the base so that we could add the lighting later. But still keeping it in line with how Matt set it up. Like the light source is coming from like the would you call these candelabras or just I guess candle holders? And also this orb, I believe it's an orb right over here. Could be like a halo or an orb, but that's something that it seems like the light source is basically coming from here. So light is basically illuminating from these areas and lights the whole illustration. So we want to keep that in mind as we're painting. You can always have a thumbnail of it. Like let's say I extend it using the crop tool. I'll extend this. Copy and paste this again. Command T or Control T for free transform. I'll just make it smaller. Oh, no, I did the wrong one. It's important to click on the layer that you want to manipulate. Control T, Command T, and just have this here as a guide. Because as you're painting, sometimes you lose the fact that, you lose what you're trying to do. So sometimes it's good to have a little bit of a guide. That's why thumbnails and value studies are really, really important. Because it can help you as you move along to your finished illustration. So we have that here. I'm going to lock it so I don't accidentally paint on it. Let me screw this here. There you go. Alright, I'm going to copy and paste this again. I'm going to put this up here so that I don't accidentally touch it. So you can stack the layers as you please, the best way that you can work with it. And now I'm just going to go for the local values as I'm rendering, right? Alright, so let's say this is like a halo. And instead of an orb, I could just design around it. I'm just taking my hard brush, round brush like this, toggle on, 100% opacity. Smoothing is really up to you. As we mentioned in the beginner video that I posted, 0% means freehand, 100% means it has a bit of a give to it. So it's perfect if if you have more of if you want to do like line art or scripting, 100% is great. But I tend to stay within like 0 to 10%. So I can still have a freehand, but since I have a jittery hold on my brush, I like a little stability to it. Alright, so again, hold down on Option or Alt to pick up your values and colors and just start painting. This and here. Again, this is coming from a more of a traditional painter type of situation. I could lower my brush, right click on your brush, you could lower the size of it, probably the easiest thing to do. And I'm just gonna start rendering. Let's say I want my staff like this. I really like the design here. Start pressing on that. Remember, our light source is gonna probably come from that little halo here, so I'm gonna start adding a little indicator. Like Matt really has a really cool drawing style and design here, so it's fairly easy for me to kind of just fill in the areas. And as you can see, since I'm using like a normal hard brush with no textures to it, it's going to be easy for me to add textures to it later. If you start out with a texture already, you're pretty much just committed to using that texture. Unless if you want to change it, then again, you're just gonna have a hard time sort of just changing the whole thing all over again. So I'm just, again, since you have your pressure, like you have your opacity here and you're working with a tablet, the lighter you press, the less amount of paint goes in, or the transparency is a little bit more. The harder you press, it's going to be the maximum amount of percentage you have here. If you don't want the hardest you press to be 100%, lower your opacity. So if I press the hardest, the maximum is 47%. But I tend to like to work with 100 just so I have a more of a range. So, and as you can see, if I'm when you're painting, you have to have your other hand always on top of the Option or Alt key because you need it to pick up the colors constantly. As I'm going, I'm keeping that lighting in mind. Now, the lighting that I'm only concerned with here is pretty much just how the light hits your form, your environment, and your characters. Not so much the lighting effects. I'll deal with that one a little bit later. I think this week you guys are going to encounter the basic shapes. Now, if you look at the form here, I think it's more evident in Matt's illustration that the form is pretty much made up of, even the environment, they're made up of those basic shapes. The complex shapes that you see here are built up using those basic shapes. So you want to treat each of those individual shapes and light them based on those shapes. Like for example, this little globe here is basically a sphere, right? So let's say we put it in this value and the lighting is up here, then you're gonna light it like a sphere. You're gonna take that, add lighting to it, the shadows can be on the other side. and you have yourself a really cool looking sphere. So pick up the colors option, and then the staff, it's just a cylinder. It's just a cylinder, right? So we'll take the light, it's going to hit it on this side, and just add the lighting on top of it. And just start taking those surrounding values and just render it out. And then the head here, maybe it's just like a cylinder as well. So it's going to hit the top like this, using that. And then maybe, since it's on top, maybe it's going to hit it on the sides with a shadow in the front. And then the scarf here is basically almost like a cone. So I'm just going to take a little shadow area here. And then the throne basically just seems to be like cubes, maybe a block. So let's just paint it that way. Right now I'm looking at the throne. It's a little bit, doesn't have a lot of depth or dimension, so maybe you could add some stuff to it. So this is a perfect time to experiment with stuff, right? So let's say I block in this throne here. So I'm just cleaning up those textures, something I could reintroduce later on. And let's say I want to add more to it than just a simple block. I could start, this is where you could start like a brand new layer. And then since you have that brand new layer, you could sort of just experiment with it. Like maybe you want to add some more dimension to it. So it's not just this flat object. So now there's more planes to it, there's more for your light to hit, creating a more three-dimensional object. So here and here. Maybe you can even add really cool looking designs. Again, references are really important. Like maybe for this one, look up some Egyptian hieroglyphs, some Mayan designs, something really, really cool. And again, since that's a relief, maybe the light's gonna hit the top here. Maybe like there's a sphere behind. So this, again, this is like just coming off of like a flat shape, so maybe the light's gonna hit that. So as you can see here, there's more of a three-dimensional feel to it now. You can take this, let's say you're good with that, merge it together. So here's a before and after. Just a couple of minutes, all we did was just basically start blocking in your shapes and start rendering out those basic shapes and connecting them together. Excuse me. Create a brand new layer. Actually, I'm going to copy this again. There you go. And for this one, start adding in the cool design for the halo or what have you. For this one, I'm going to turn off my opacity toggle. Actually, let me sketch it out first. So I'll take a color, let's say red. I'm just going to sort of sketch out what I want, right? Since it's on another layer, it's totally fine. You can always take it out later. But let's say let's add this. Another one like this. Maybe it has a cool looking like a mandala design to it. something simple. Again, use references. It'll greatly help you out. Alright, so that's pretty cool. So on that brand new layer, I could take, let's say, white. And then I could take my smoothing tool, bump it up to 100, turn off the opacity so I get a nice hard shape out of it. And I could just start tracing it. See what that smoothing does? It allows you to have stability to your brush. Ideally, you want to do this maybe in layers. Like let's say draw the throne in one layer, draw your characters in another layer, so that we could put this in a back layer right here, so that we don't have to sort of dance around all these shapes. You can just do a complete design and just place it behind the throne. So ideally, that's what you want to do. So again, that's where thinking ahead in terms of like what you want to do come in handy. So you can plot out exactly how your illustration and workflow is going to be like. So now that I have my design, I could turn off that red layer and just throw it away. And you could continue. You could just start adding more stuff on top of it if you like. Let me turn off smoothing so I could just continue to add stuff on top of it. Smoothing, again, adds stabilization, but it makes it impossible to freehand anything. So sometimes you have to turn it off. Alright, so you have that on that layer. I'll say, okay, maybe that's too far back and then it's too sharp. Maybe I want to make it softer, add some blur to it. That's where some of these filters come in handy. Filters are good, but please do not rely on the filters, because the filters will just kind of make your illustration really artificial looking. You want to use them sparingly. I would avoid the filter gallery. You might not want to use that at all. You might want to just pay attention to the ones found here, like blur. So if I go to blur, and then go to Gaussian blur, and mess around with it, the window pops up, and you could mess around with the blurriness of that. So it's not so sharp anymore. Alright, so let's merge these two together. So now let's say I want to place the shadows and start mapping out the shadows in the light. So we can start doing that here as well. So in a prior video I said multiply is a really good blending mode for shadow. So on a brand new layer, set to multiply. If you want more details on like the blending modes, we're gonna get into that in the next module or two. But I did do a quick rundown using another illustration for a demonstration. So please check that out. It was prior to this one. I went into the blend modes just a little bit. So again, set it to multiply if you want shadows. And this is where I take my hard brush. Again, as you notice, I didn't really switch brushes at all. Take a darker value and just start plotting out your shadows. Like shadow here. Probably the whole front's gonna be in shadow. Maybe he has a little bit of shadow behind him. It's kind of hard because you have symmetrical lights on the sides, so you don't have like that really dynamic one-sided lighting. And since it's coming from here, maybe there's a little shadow here. And the great thing is, again, separate layer, you could lower the opacity so that you can just mess around with the shadow just a little bit. You can even take a soft brush. This is where the soft brush comes in for me. Let's say, I really like it, but again, the two candle holders on the side kind of messes with that really dynamic lighting. Maybe you could take those out. You could always add those in a little bit later, but for now I want to take these out. I want the main light source to be from the center and the throne. So I'm going to take these two out for now. And now I'm going to base the lighting just on that one light source right over here. Now I'll go back to my shadow. I'm just going to keep adding in those shadows. Since it's set to multiply, you could use different values. Like the darker it is, of course, the more it stands out. So really play around with the blend modes of multiply to get your shadow. Now you can always like do one area first, like let's say the throne here, and then start a brand new layer again, and then set that one to multiply as well, and that's totally okay. You can have as much layers as you want stacked on top of each other. But you have to keep in mind that since they are transparent, they will multiply, as the blend mode suggests. They will basically stack up until you get 100%. So you want to keep that in mind as you're stacking them up. And really play around with it. Again, since you're working with layers, you can just throw them away if you don't like them afterwards. And then here you have the cylindrical pillars. Of course, those are going to get more of a shadow to them. Now, if you're doing the whole environment, maybe you could just do what like I did with the prior demonstration. Take your paint bucket tool. Just paint the whole thing of value. Maybe like a dark gray or a black. And set that one to multiply. Maybe you don't want to paint them in. Like it's hard for you to paint in your whole environment. Just turn everything into darkness. Lower the opacity slightly. And then let's use our eraser. Where's my eraser? Right over here. With the toggle on, and you can erase away the shadow on this layer. Like let's say here, the light's gonna hit here, the light's gonna hit here as well. Here, and also your character here. So let's take our soft brush now. And as mentioned before, when you're using your eraser, you can only use the default brushes. You cannot use the custom brushes that have a little bit of a icon there. That's how you know it's a custom brush. You have to use the default brush without the little icon on the top. So I'm basically erasing away the shadow. So I show you two ways to add shadows. Either paint them on or erase them out. So the light's going to hit here and here. Yeah, you can also spend more time with it than what I'm doing now, of course. just for the demonstration, I'm just trying to speed it up just a little bit. Just a little bit. And then if you make a mistake, you just paint those shadows back in. Like, I forgot about the pillars here. So maybe I want to paint those shadows back in. I painted too much out, so I'll paint those back in. All in this one layer. If it's too dark, you can lower the opacity. Again, you can put as much multiply layer as you want. Set another multiply layer. Maybe I want to start adding onto your character. Here. Add more to the pillar if you'd like. Just right now, the main character is just kind of fleshed out, so I'm just adding more shadows to him. Using the multiply is also a great way to place more values onto something. Like if I zoom in on the character, set this one to multiply, then I could add more values to him. This. I'm just using this dark gray right now, but I'm controlling it using the pen pressure. So for the tail, maybe I want that to be darker, so I'm pressing really hard on my stylus. The eyes, darken that little raccoon eyes. Maybe I want it a bit lighter here. Now multiply will not lighten your illustration, so that's something that you have to do on another layer, which is the lighten layer or overlay. You can use that as well. But what I tend to do is to start a brand new layer once I put in the shadows, and we'll just paint on top of it again, taking out that texture. I want to paint an opaque block in. And then I'm also going to start picking up some lighter values so that I can sort of add in those lights now. Right here for the cylinder, I maybe want to round that up just a little bit more so it's not so flat. So it has some more of ellipses in the bottom. So when you're painting, you want to paint opaquely, right? Alright, that looks pretty good. So I'm just gonna hold on Shift, merge everything together. So let's look at our version. So this is one version, and let's look back. This is the second version, and then the prior version before that, and then the original. So create checkpoint. So let's say you don't really like this, you could go back to that checkpoint. So, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, if you're using blend modes, you have to merge everything together this way. You can't just go down one and down one, or merge these guys together, or you'll lose the multiply blend mode effect. You have to merge it into an opaque layer like this one right over here, so that you won't lose the effect at all. Alright, so let's copy this. We have our shadow layer. Now let's create a brand new layer again, and let's set this one to, let's say, overlay. Overlay is really, really good at adding in the glows and you know, creating light effects. So we're going to use overlay. Again, we'll get into the blend modes a little bit more next time, but here I'm going to use white. And then all I'm gonna do is use a soft brush. Let me use a soft brush. Soft brush, opacity on, set this layer to overlay. Use a lighter color than the values that you find here. So in order to use the overlay, you have to use a lighter value than what you're trying to lighten, right? Makes sense. So let's start adding in. And look at that. Look how nice and nuanced that light is. And then I could go to the pillars. And I could put it the ground here. See how it interacts with all the different values? It's not just like, if I set this one to normal, that's basically what I'm doing. But if you set it to overlay, it'll interact with every single value that you have. And then, oops, should I use that one? Use white, it's better. I'll lower my brush size. So the thing about using the blend modes though is that it will affect your illustration, but it will, you know, affect it the way it is. So if I use overlay in even shadow, if you have texture there, the texture will remain. So if you want that gone, you have to paint it out using a, you know, opaque brush strokes. So turning the light off and on. We can start thinking about the balanced lights on the other side here. Of course the light should penetrate this side as well. I don't know why I keep picking that, but I do. Look how much that light's just being turned on there. And let me merge that together. So I mentioned this too, is that you don't want to rely too much on the blend mode. Like, don't say, oh, don't go, oh, blend mode done, 100%, I'm good. You still want to start a brand new layer on top and then use opaque brush strokes to do your cleanup. Still want to clean up your illustration. Hold down Option or Alt, start painting in and start taking out all these little things. Pull values around your illustration and start cleaning it up. Alright, so let's say that you're done. Let's say you're happy and you get to this stage where everything is blocked in. You have your shadows, your core shadows, your cast shadows. Your lighting is pretty much set. Now is when we start doing the like going back to the cake, start doing the frosting and then the sprinkles. So this is where you start adding in textures and stuff, right? So you could use a brush. Let's say I have my texture brush here. Like a little bit of a different texture. I could start that in a brand new layer. Let me use a dark value. Let's say I want like a more textures on the ground, so I'm just gonna paint that in and set using the blend modes again. Set to multiply. You can lower the opacity, and then that's where you add in your textures. This way you can control those textures just a little bit more than you would if you did it in the beginning, where if I don't like it, I can always throw it away. I can always start a brand new layer again, set to multiply again, and then add even more types of textures. You can also start introducing patterns. Like let's say here, brand new layer. I will go look through my. And by the way, this is when I start really playing around with the different brushes. Let's say we have this weird brush here, which creates a bit of a pattern. Let me just mess with it just a little bit. We'll get into the brush settings a little bit later as well. I just don't want to overwhelm you guys. Let's say that. Okay. So for this one, let's say I want to add a little bit of pattern to the columns. And set this one to multiply. Now you have really cool patterns to it. And let's go back to our normal brush. And let me use the soft brush so I can integrate it just a little bit better. So yeah, you can use the blend modes to add textures as well, and not just, you know, not just other things, not just shadows and light. And you could go back here to that brush, and you could use overlay again, or maybe lighten if you want to lighten something. I'll take my soft brush. Add a little bit of grain to it. Again, this is a little bit of a problem if you go to a custom brush and then go back to a default brush. Sometimes this happens where there's a little bit of a grain. I mean, honestly, it looks really, really good. Adding a little bit of grain in there because it adds some more texture. But if you don't want it, you have to go to your tool, your brush tool, click, and reset tool or reset all tools. I tend to just use reset tool, and it will go back to that standard default brush. Merge, and we have a little lighting. Start a brand new layer again. So now we can start adding the sprinkles, which is the lighting effects. So on a brand new layer, I'll take my soft brush, I'll set it to white or whatever value you choose. I'll set this one to overlay again and just start adding in your cool lighting. I'll make sure that you have your opacity toggle on, and you can even go in. I'm gonna really make this look cool and glowy. How cool that is. The overlay tool is really, really cool. Glow to tops here. Since this part of the pillar is closest to the light source, then you can just start adding in a little bit more light. Also, the steps is gonna get a little bit of light in there. So adding a little bit more depth to it as well, so you can actually see the top of those steps now. By the way, if you want a straight line, hold down on Shift. It'll give you a straight line up and down. And there you go. Spend your time on this. I'll stop here, but spend your time on this. Look what I could, done in like just maybe less than an hour. If you spend a lot of time on this, and that's another thing I forgot to kind of touch upon. If you're looking at what I'm doing and say, okay, am I going too slow? Please don't think that. I probably had a little bit more experience with Photoshop than some of you guys. So if you look at it and go, how come I'm going really slow? Please don't compare yourself. Once you get used to the program and start knowing all the tools and the features that Photoshop has, you know, you can go at a much quicker pace. But please work at your own pace for now. Don't compare yourself to other illustrators out there who probably has more experience with the program, because in due time, you know, you'll get to you'll kind of vibe with the program and kind of set your own pace afterwards. So yeah, oh yeah, don't think that you have to, you know, okay, how come I'm not going this fast or what have you. Set your own pace, and just the important thing is to learn the program and, you know, make sure you understand it so that you can do really cool things with it afterwards. All right, that's pretty much it. Thank you, Matt, for me using your illustration. Hopefully, you got something out of it. Sorry if your critique's gonna be longer than everybody else's. But yeah, on to the next video, I guess. Can't wait to see you guys' final illustration. Have a nice one.